This episode is brought to you by Yumiko. Yumiko just released a multicolor plus black and white collection of leotards. Pieces feature intricate designs that can include different colors within the same panel, alternating velvet and nylon trims on different sides of the body, as well as multiple fabrics and colors on straps and necklines. Stand out in class and rehearsals with these beautiful designs that are like nothing you have ever seen before. We invite you to see these new items in person at the Yumiko store in New York City, and on December 8th, you can come see us too. We will be recording a live podcast on Saturday, December 8th at 4 p.m. at Yumiko's New York flagship boutique with special guest Juliet Doherty, star of the movie On Point. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook for more information coming soon about our live podcast on Saturday, December 8th at 4 p.m. And in the meantime, explore all of Yumiko's beautiful and personalized dancewear at yumiko.com. This episode is brought to you by the Town of Vale and hosted by Manor Vale Lodge, important partners of the 2018 Vale Dance Festival. I'm Rebecca King-Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance. This week on Conversations on Dance, we are joined by one of the ballet world's most celebrated pianists, Cameron Grant. Cameron joined the New York City Ballet in 1984, where he was appointed pianist of the New York City Ballet Orchestra 4 years later. He has played nearly every major piano ballet in the repertoire, including Balanchine masterworks like Davidsbundlertanze and Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto No. 2, and Robbins ballets like Dances at a Gathering and Goldberg Variations. We spoke with Cameron about how he came to work for the ballet, what working with Jerome Robbins was like, and the unique challenges of playing for ballet dancers. Cameron, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you have a lot of rehearsals, so we really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us.
My pleasure.
So let's start at the beginning. At what age did you first become interested in music?
Well, my three older brothers were all already studying piano, and then they all ended up doing other instruments. So it was kind of natural to go into, start something. And they were studying with Antonia Brico, who was the first woman to conduct the New York Philharmonic, and she had ended up in Denver, where I grew up. And she said, "How old is Cam?" And they said 5. She said, "Perfect. He's going to be going to school. He can start on the piano." So I started, and everybody else ended up going to another instrument and didn't pursue music as a career, but piano I just kept going.
So you always enjoyed it then, or it was just kind of something that was naturally a part of your life?
I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, probably didn't practice, like crazy hours or anything until I was really in college, and I heard colleagues practicing, and I went, okay, I get it. It's going to take some real hours.
Uh-huh.
Is that about the time you decided that you wanted to pursue music professionally?
Well, the thing is that my teacher had always had us play in concerts.
Mm-hmm.
We gave a recital every year, and then she conducted the Denver Symphony, and I think I was 11 or something playing with the orchestra, and that's kind of terror-filled, but also thrilling.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're doing performance, it kind of gets in your blood, and then, so I would say when it came time to choose a college was probably when I decided that since that was about the only thing I could do really well, I better pursue it.
So where did you end up going to college?
I went to New England Conservatory for 2 years, and then my girlfriend had moved to California to go to CalArts when it started on its new campus in Valencia.
Mm-hmm.
And I went out to visit her, and the piano teacher there was Lee Hambro, who is in the Philharmonic and also the second pianist to Victor Borge. And he was so enthusiastic about my coming out there that he talked me into going to CalArts. So I went there for 2 years. And then I realized that being a big fish in a small pond is not the answer. So I moved back to Boston and got a master's at New England again.
So then what drew you to New York City?
Well, my good buddy, who I had known the first time in Boston, showed up on my doorstep when I was about to play with the Boston Pops as a graduation concert. And he just said to me, he said, "Well, if you're going to be a musician, you should move to New York." And I said, "Sounds good to me." And so I said, "What are you doing?" And he said he was at loose ends. So we ended up sharing an apartment in New York, and he stayed a year and I never left.
Yeah.
So,
That's amazing. So you auditioned for a spot at the ballet at New York City Ballet at a friend's suggestion. Had you always thought about performing with ballet, or is that something that just
never had crossed my mind. I didn't know a damn thing about it.
Uh-huh.
But the idea of, instead of running around and doing like 20 rehearsals of really, really hard new music, which is what I was doing, and then making $200, I thought, well, going to work at Lincoln Center every day, how bad can it be?
Right.
So, I mean, it actually was pretty bad at the beginning because I didn't know what I was doing.
Uh-huh.
It was all those old Balanchine ballerinas at the end of their career, very cranky, very impatient, and I was bad. I mean, I could play the piano, but that's not the gig. The gig is knowing the collaboration,
Right.
and knowing what they need.
Yeah.
And so my favorite day of every year was the last day of work. I'd leave the stage door at the State Theater and just like practically do somersaults because I was so happy to leave.
Oh my God.
But then, you get better.
Yeah.
You hang around. After a few years, I was better. I kind of started to get what the job was, even though this is my 34th year there. And I would say I'm still learning little nuances and tricks and, how to make the process flow smoothly.
What were some of the major adjustments you had to make initially when you were first starting out at City Ballet?
Well, what you realize, I'm a slow learner, but what I realized is that what they need is not great piano playing. In fact, it matters not at all practically. I mean, in the rehearsal process.
Right.
And the rehearsal process really are the nuts and bolts of making that organization run. It's the day in and day out, grind out the rehearsals, they're working on their thing. And basically you're there to enable them to, work out what they need to work out. And so it becomes, you really have to know the rubato and the tempos. How many wrong notes you play, how beautiful your sound is, all that stuff, they could care less. And in a certain way, that remains so in performance. You can do what you think is, Horowitz level. And if the tempo wasn't right, you're going to hear about it. Because they don't, it's not the interpretation.
Right.
It's the doing what they expect, even though it's live. So it's always going to be a little bit of a crapshoot.
So how do you find your own voice in that there are tighter parameters maybe than if you're just playing in a concert hall, that you're doing this for the dancers, but you also have to get something out of it for yourself as an artist?
I think once you realize you have to figure out what they need, which is about tempo and rubato. And then within that, you find how to make the music sound like that's how it goes. And that's, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have a problem with that. At first, most musicians really resist that because they feel like they're compromising. But it's a collaborative art. You can't just go in and play a Stravinsky piece the way you imagine it should go because somebody has put steps to it to a specific tempo and it isn't going to change. So you can't say, well, I've heard so many guest conductors, especially, say, well, this is too slow. It has to go faster.
Right.
But, if Balanchine set it at a tempo, it's got to go at that tempo or close. So you find where you can express yourself within those confines, and it doesn't really become, restrictive once you realize what the gig really is.
Are there certain examples of specific works that you felt like you had to make major alterations to, where it's like you've never heard it so slow or fast or whatever, that you had to make your biggest adjustments for?
I would say on almost all of Jerry Robbins' Chopin, and because he was all about theater, so he would make certain decisions about how the piece, certain places of the piece should go, certain tempos or stops and starts and that kind of thing. And you just have to learn them, and they're fine when somebody's looking at the dance. They don't notice that if you played that same thing in a concert, people would say, "What is wrong with that guy?" It's so exaggerated.
Yeah.
It's so slow. But you combine the visual and the oral element, and it all seems very natural. In fact, another pianist at SAB, I had played Dances at a Gathering, and she had heard it, and she said to me, "You sounded great, and it's amazing. You don't have to really do anything, unusual." And I thought, I've succeeded, because she bought in.
You fooled a professional.
I mean, and so what I did with the dancers was convincing enough that it just seemed natural, which is also a tribute to Robbins' genius.
Right. Let's talk about him a little bit more in your work that you did with him. What major pieces did you work on with Jerry?
I did Goldberg Variations. I did Dances at a Gathering. I did In the Night. I think by the time I did other dances, he wasn't around. But of course, Goldberg and Dances are the two monuments.
Yeah. What was that experience like for you? We've heard some dancers talk about the experience of it. What was it like for you being in the studio with him?
Honestly?
Yeah.
Tell us.
Because that's kind of how I am. So he was the meanest guy I've ever seen, period, by 10 times.
Yeah.
I think he was tormented in himself. He was a perfectionist. If he would see some poor young female dancer having a bad day, it was like a shark seeing blood. She would be in tears for the whole rehearsal. And I don't know what he terrified dancers, except for certain principles he seemed to have velvet gloves with.
Right.
They couldn't do any wrong in a certain way. But everybody else around, stage, musicians, everybody he just terrorized everybody basically.
Yeah.
And but I don't know, he seemed to get an incredible product. Now, my experience is that way of dealing with people, with musicians, is only counterproductive. You don't get any positive results. You get somebody like scared to death that they're going to take the wrong tempo. But it's not constructive with musicians. Now, I can't speak for dancers because he seemed to get these incredible results. I mean, I've never seen his works look as good as when he was alive coaching them.
That's interesting.
I mean, the one thing that I can say is when he was getting old and I'd played everything, he hated to change pianists, but one of our pianists got AIDS and another pianist started having physical problems. So I took over this massive Robbins stuff. The concert was another one that I did a lot.
Oh, wonderful.
And so at one point, we'd just been through the wars and he had lost some of his bite. He was getting old and he was sitting at the piano before a West Side rehearsal on stage, and he always liked to kind of plink out some Bach or something. So I walked over and without even thinking, I said, "Why don't you play the piano and I'll yell at the dancers today?" And he gave kind of a classic Robbins, frown, and then he smiled. He realized that it was a joke.
Can we talk about the concert for a second? I would like to know, because you're really a part of that ballet in a lot of ways. How is that different or exciting for you to kind of be a character in that ballet?
Well, it's such an incredible ballet. I mean, to me, the first 5 or 10 minutes is just top drawer. I think it sags a little, but after that in places. But that opening is, when it's done right, it's hysterical. And I always enjoyed it. And that's funny because when I did it once with him, after I'd done it a bunch. And I just said to him, I'd been told the whole opening that the pianist does. I'd been taught that and did it, and it was fine, got it. And I said to him one day, you've never coached me on the opening. And he actually started to do some different things. But then one of the guys who said to me afterwards said, don't do that. Do what it's been. But I'm really sorry that that's not recorded, because it would be interesting.
Yeah, to see.
Right? Because he was always inventing. So he was like, okay, try this and try. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't mean to do something new.
Yeah.
But it was funny. After the very first dress rehearsal that I did of that piece, we were all done, the usual kind of feeling wrung out after Robbins' dress rehearsal. And he looks across at me. I'm like 20 feet away, and he points and he says, and tonight you'll have a mustache. And I thought, I don't have a mustache. And I thought, okay,
whatever.
So I turned to somebody and said, how do I get a mustache? Go down to, makeup. They'll figure out, they'll put them on a mustache. And it was perfect, because when I have that mustache on, I don't know, I look either, I tend to smile a lot, and I don't think he wanted that look. He wanted something more formal or severe or whatever it was. And it's perfect, because the mustache kind of looks funky on me, but it helps hide the tendency to smile. And when you enter in that ballet, you're supposed to be looking sort of down at the audience, like none of you are worthy of hearing what I have to offer. And I think it kind of helps that attitude.
I bet the audience loved that, because City Ballet audiences know you. I mean, they see you night after night as you, but then to have you come out in that look, I mean, I'm sure that people were just loving it.
They were laughing. The orchestra always laughs because they think it looks so funny.
Is it hard to not laugh as
It's
the
really
dancers are coming
hard.
in?
fact, that ballet well?
Yeah, we
We've
did
danced
it.
it,
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
what am I thinking then?
I was shy boy. Rebecca did
I did one of the
ladies.
Yeah.
So the mad, what do they call her? The
Mad ballerina.
Yeah, the mad. No, not the mad ballerina.
Oh.
The girl who comes in and slams.
Oh,
the chair.
Angry Girl.
Angry
Yeah.
Girl. So Michelle Gifford is doing it, and it's one of my very first ones. And every time she came over, I didn't dare look over there. I always wanted
right in your face, right?
Yeah, she's right at the edge of the piano with her elbow on the edge of the piano, and I really wanted to look like, what are you doing here? Kind of, because I thought that was the character. But every time I'd turn, I'd laugh.
Yeah.
So I finally so I could do that. And I thought, I'm going to hold it together. I'm fine. I'd done it. And so I've got the, kind of serious, alarmed look on my face. And I turn to Michelle. I do it perfectly without, anything. And just as I turned back to the piano, she went, pretty good, pretty good.
No, and then you lost it.
But then I'm facing the music again. But she's got her back to the audience.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was funny.
Oh my gosh, I love that moment.
Every year, the Dance Magazine Awards bring stunning moments of artistry and poignant speeches from the awardees. This year, on December 3rd, Dance Magazine honors Lourdes Lopez, Crystal Pite, Michael Trusnovic, and Ronald K. Brown, while Misty Copeland will be welcoming the guests. In addition, 2 Harkness Promise Awards and the first ever Leadership Award will be given out as well. For tickets to this uplifting evening, go to dancemagazine.com and click on Dance Magazine Awards. The awards will be held at the Ailey Citigroup Theater in New York City. I was wondering, since you said, initially it was difficult to kind of find your way playing at the ballet, that you would look forward to the end, right? So were you working with Jerry at that point? Would that have been a contributing factor to a difficult adjustment, or did that come later?
I wouldn't have been working with him yet, because I had 3 spectacular solo pianists above me at that point. And when I joined, I actually was sharing one position, because I was so busy on the outside that I just couldn't do 6 days a week. And also the guy I was sharing the position with was fabulous. So I was slow to take over any solo repertoire. So, and Jerry, not ever wanting to switch
A new person?
pianists. I only went into that rep because of the physical difficulties of my colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't a factor.
Right. Okay.
Were you really intimidated going in and changing since he didn't like to change pianists?
Oh, yeah. But he was intimidating. You could do an average rehearsal. No, out of the rehearsal situation, he'd say hello.
Ah.
5 minutes before, he would have sliced and diced you.
Ah.
Because you represent, when he's in a rehearsal situation, you're not a person.
Mm.
You're just a part of his vision. And if you're not lining up with his vision, you're history, So, no.
That's interesting.
Interesting. So how do you maintain this grueling schedule of playing for company rehearsals all day and then playing for performances at night without burning out?
Well, it's funny that you would say that, because a year and a half ago,
Mm-hmm.
I stopped everything but the orchestra job. I'm just the orchestra pianist now.
So no rehearsals anymore.
No rehearsals, which means no solos,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to rehearse with the dancers every day for the solos.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to a certain age, and I would do that. I was the orchestra pianist, rehearsal pianist, and solo pianist. And I'd come in for an orchestra rehearsal at, 10 o'clock. I mean, starting at 10 or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then do rehearsals in the afternoon. And then maybe at 9:30 at night, play pictures at an exhibition or Piano Concerto No. 2.
Right.
Not easy things.
No,
things.
really hard things.
Yeah.
And what scared me was the mental fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
because my brain is really active during a performance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of my colleagues is always amused because I'll say, you know what I was thinking at that place? And you know what I was thinking at that place? And it really has to be incredibly engaged in such details as I'm playing.
Mm-hmm.
And with mental fatigue, I felt like I was one step behind.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so scary. I went, wait, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
One of these days, I would for certain performances, I didn't know. I would feel like I didn't know if I was going to crash and burn in a performance. Maybe in a piece I'd played 30 times, like Goldberg. But Goldberg, when you're tired and you're standing at the door to go out and play, and you're exhausted, and you know that for the next hour and 15 minutes it's you. I just was like, oh my God, every time, that piece a little bit every time, but if you're tired, it was just excruciating.
I'm sure.
And then it would be fine.
Yeah.
Right. But the feeling beforehand
Mm-hmm.
is so extreme.
Yeah.
And I think what did it was one weekend, they were planning the programs for one season, and they had pictures,
Mm-hmm.
Alexi's ballet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Goldberg.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, you want to play? They were each, I think, 4 times in 10 days.
Oh.
So I'm going Goldberg pictures. And I said, I can, I know those pieces really well. By this time I'd played pictures a lot, and I thought it's fine. Then I got there and I'm playing Goldberg. And then the next day I'm playing pictures, and I went, what was I thinking? I went into a room with Nancy, my colleague, and I said, talk about hubris. I mean, how stupid was I? And so performances were fine.
Right.
But I was playing pictures on a Saturday night. I'd probably played something in the matinee.
Mm-hmm.
Playing pictures Saturday night and Sunday matinee, right? And that feeling before the Saturday night pictures was one of those where I thought, I have no idea what's going to happen tonight.
Right.
I said to my page turner, I just was like, I got no clue because I'm exhausted. Went totally fine.
Yeah.
The next afternoon, I come in, no rehearsals. I'm rested. It was like a walk in the park.
Yeah.
I went, it's great.
Sure.
But, I thought before I have a true crash and burn, maybe it's time to pass the baton. So we ended up, I actually recruited a guy who's now my replacement, who's a fantastic player.
Oh, wow. So what is that process like for finding someone, and how much are you involved with passing on the knowledge that you've curated all these years?
Well, he's really, really smart, and he does his homework. So he hasn't tapped me a lot. But I think the the company somehow was in denial that I actually meant what I said, that I was leaving. So nobody was doing anything, which is shocking to me, because I kept saying, I'm leaving in
It's really happening.
a year. You guys should, okay, we'll get on that, So nothing was done, absolutely nothing. So I went out and, I checked with a guy who's head of percussion, who's an old friend of mine. And I said, who do you know? And he said, well, there are two great contemporary music pianists in New York that are friends of mine. Why don't you ask them? Because my experience is that somebody who can play really hard contemporary music, most of us grew up on not that. We grew up on Chopin and all that stuff. So I figured that if the guy can play the hardest contemporary, he can play any classical, right? So I talked to these two guys, and one of them, pretty soon after we started talking and I was explaining the job, he told me he wasn't interested because he's really busy as a performer in the New York area, well, all over the world. And the other one, though, is older, and I think he was thinking the same thing I was thinking when I took the job. It wouldn't be so bad to have health insurance, a regular salary, and go to work in the same place,
right.
And then I can add other stuff.
Yeah.
So he asked me like 100 questions about which was good.
Wow, yeah.
And I was totally honest about the job. I said, you're going to feel humiliated. You're going to feel worthless. You're going to feel embarrassed, but if you can push through, you get to play all these incredibly cool pieces.
Yeah.
And so he said, I'll give it a shot. And he's still there.
Awesome. That's great.
Did you have like a sort of tipping point where you did find that you were able to just enjoy playing that great rep, where you were finally past the place of that sort of humiliation, if you will?
Well, the humiliation is not in performances, because performances were always the easiest part of the day.
Right.
If you weren't too tired. Because nobody's telling you anything, nobody's clapping their hands, nobody's screaming at you in rehearsals. Right. That's where that humiliation comes from. But when you got to the performance, you felt free because there ain't going to be anybody stopping you.
Right.
So then you're just into the music.
You joined the New York City Ballet Orchestra the year after Balanchine died. What were some of the ways that you still felt his presence affecting the musical direction?
Well, I joined the company in 1984. The orchestra job, I think, was started about 1998. The original pianist, Yasha Zaidi, was very old, and he finally retired. And he'd been there since the beginning. And then the music department decided that they wanted me to take that job. But anyway, to your question, I would say that in a certain way that that same influence is still in the building. I wouldn't say it's changed particularly. There was a kind of pall, of course, because he had died, and that incredible inspiration, you can't replace that. Here's a guy who's a musician, a genius choreographer,
right?
Cared deeply about his dancers and the company. So his absence is noticed, but there was always this dedication to what Mr. B or Mr. Balanchine, depending on who was saying it, would have wanted. And at that time, there was just this collection of people that were so good at what they did. Like the pianist that hired me was Balanchine's main pianist, Gordon Bilsner. Right. And there wasn't a better pianist alive for that kind of thing. And he was, he was close to Mr. B. So he knew every twitch of every musical nuance of Balanchine's stuff. And also he was the original pianist for Goldberg and dances. So he was this monumental presence himself. But I think everybody just wanted kind of to, make Mr. B proud of what was continuing. So there was this real dedication to the pureness of his thoughts and steps.
Yeah. So we're here at the Vail Dance Festival. That's what brought us together to be able to talk today. Why is this a gig or a performance that you want to be a part of and that you are eager to accept?
Well, pretty much anything Damien gets involved in, I'm happy to get involved in. I mean, he's one of a kind, his energy and imagination. And we work together a lot at City Ballet. Mm-hmm. And then he wanted me to come here back when he was starting here. And I think, the level of dancing, the people that he puts together that would never be together otherwise. And then you got these musicians coming in, like Brooklyn Ryder, those guys are just ridiculously talented.
Yeah.
And it's just, you never know what you're going to do. This year's exciting because I'm working with Lauren Lovett on her new ballet, which is a Schumann solo piano piece. So
Wonderful.
That's a real highlight. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we talk a lot with the dancers about how cool it is for everyone to be together from different companies, different styles, that sort of thing. So like you mentioned, there's also a lot of musicians here too. So how do you feel that influences you having all this talent around you as well?
It's just, it's so fertile. Mm-hmm. And, it's really fun to see people that I never see normally during the year, Misa and James and Calvin and people that I don't work with.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a blast.
Yeah.
Right.
Because, you tend to be so insular with your own company. And this kind of explodes that notion.
Yeah.
And then I'm in the ballet world so much that when I hook up with these musicians that I don't normally work with, they're so good that I have to, I have to really pay attention, and just say, okay, you got to really, really zero in with these guys because they're just at such a high level that it's a real inspiration.
That's great.
So we're at the end of the interview, but we have one final portion that we do. We call it our lightning round, where we just ask a few short questions. What's your favorite ballet to play?
Pictures in an exhibition.
Is there a particular piece of music that you didn't get to play or a ballet you didn't get to play at New York City Ballet?
There's one that I would have liked to play more of, and there's only one, and it's DSCH, Shostakovich Second Piano Concerto, Alexei Ballet.
They did that in Miami this year. I hadn't seen it in New York, and I was just like blown away by how great that ballet is.
Who wouldn't be?
Right, yeah.
Right? And it doesn't hurt that he chooses good works.
Really good.
Dance to.
Really good music.
Yeah.
But the opening to the second movement of that ballet, when the piano comes in, it just melts you, right?
So great.
Who's the most musical dancer you've played for?
Oh, you really want to get me in trouble?
No.
Yeah.
You can name a few.
You can name a few.
Well, I love working with Wendy, Carla, Tyler, obviously. Miranda was, really musical. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of musical dancers. I think the ones that trusted themselves to dance to what I was doing, were the best.
So lastly, a composer that you would like to play with or for, dead or alive?
Wow, that's a good question. I forget his name, but it's the Russian guy that Alexei uses.
Oh.
Desnyetchikov or something.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm
the composer
totally butchering it. But anyway, interesting stuff. I mean, I actually played, what's that ballet that's like hoodlums that we do? Odessa.
Yeah.
Odessa. He wrote that. But, to do like a new piano piece, with him writing it and Alexei choreographing, now it's pretty close to dance heaven, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
This was such a delight.
Thanks. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining us this week. We are excited to announce that you can now listen to Conversations on Dance on Spotify, in addition to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, or through our website at conversationsondancepod.com. Subscribe now to receive notifications of new episodes. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Conversations on Dance. See you next week.